Ladies and gentlemen, the 85th president of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, CIMA, Mr. Steven Sventuzelski, is responsible for overseeing the global governance of CIMA and promoting management accounting. He's also the deputy chairman of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, and he's also an experienced executive specializing in operational transformation across a broad spectrum of organizations in the private, the public, and the consultancy sectors. He's also worked in the UK, the US, France, Germany, and Holland. Please welcome CIMA President, Mr. Steven Sventuzelski, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, Prime Minister, Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really delighted to be here at the Most Admired Corporations of Sri Lanka 2018 Awards, which have been jointly organised by CIMA and the International Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka. This prestigious inaugural event gives us all many opportunities to understand and to recognise companies' commitments to the local community and how they inspire employees whilst championing and enriching their communities. It is a humble honour to acknowledge these best companies, both listed and unlisted. The evaluation criteria for the awards highlights what makes companies succeed in today's increasingly complex and volatile world. A world that is changing at rapid pace, that real change is a new norm. And we all make individual choices of how we react to that change. Do we see that as a risk, or do we see that as an opportunity? For those who see the opportunities need to be open-minded and create agile, creative businesses that impacts on the insights that are available to us. I see many leaders in this room, leaders who have a strong commitment and desire to move your organisations forward in a world that is changing rapidly and continuously. Leaders who are committed to create and preserve value that is sustainable and ethical for your employees, customers, investors, and the general communities are indeed the global winners. As CIMA enters into its centenary year, we are celebrating our heritage and equally embracing the future. The association was set up by CIMA and the AICPA. This will ensure that the future of the profession globally remains relevant and dynamic. Remaining relevant or dynamic is a key to the private sector, but also the public sector. Having joined the rail industry on the privatisation of Railtrack and also as an NHS non-executive position, I understand how important this is. I would like to just give you a little bit of a backstory of my experiences. I joined Railtrack and it went into administration at one time, and then Network Rail was developed. And one of the things that I resonate is the grit, determination and vision that people need in this room. So my backstory is this. I was asked to set the shared services up in Network Rail. I didn't have any building, I didn't have any desks, I didn't have any phones, and I didn't have any people. I had to operate the next day. We'd gone into administration. Now, if that wasn't a challenge, can you imagine a 50 million business with that type of starting point? So every second there was £270,000 worth of transactions occurring. So every time I took a breath to think and wait, that was £500,000. To cut a very long story short, some of the awards that you'll be winning tonight is what I've used and utilised in my journey. I grasped those opportunities. I led from the front, and within 3 years from that environment, we was classed as the best shared services in the world by Hackett, and our operating costs and transactions were actually cheaper than India, which I like to boast about a little bit from time to time. So yes, indeed, as a leader, you need grit and determination, and sometimes dream the impossible dream and do what you need to do. In that, CIMA will continue to play an active role, advocating competencies and building and driving performance, both in the public and private sector. We preserve and create value within business, and we drive the internal changes, which is quicker than the external communities that we face. And that is how we preserve and create the value that we need. To that effect, we are now driving significant conversations around the future of finance, and these conversations I'm having globally. With the future of finance research, we're ensuring that the next generation of management accountants will be well equipped for tomorrow's rapidly changing business world. I was in India last week, and our perspective on the global research has raised more opportunities and collaboration that I could even think or dream about. And I hope to see that we can do this in Sri Lanka. Our public interest is to drive the relevancy of the finance profession through outcomes of this research, so that it doesn't impact the private but the public sector and the many stakeholders that depend on that. I have a perspective about the future. You don't need eyes to see the future, you need vision. And in here, I see visionary leaders. I salute all the business leaders here on the challenges you face, and I wish the award ceremony and delegates every success. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Sventuzelski. Our keynote speaker today is Mr. Sandeep Chowdhury, appointed as CEO, India for Aon Hewitt Consulting at the beginning of 2014. He looks after all areas of consulting that include talent and leadership, engagement, M&A, performance, rewards, and retirement. A member of the Asia Pacific leadership team, he has over 19 years of consulting experience, out of which 16 years is with Aon Hewitt across various offices. Sandeep is an experienced consultant with subject matter expertise in goal setting, performance management, broad-based executive and sales compensation, and he has worked extensively with local, multinational, and state-owned enterprises. Please welcome Mr. Sandeep Chowdhury, our keynote speaker today, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, Honorable Prime Minister, dignitaries, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, please accept my heartfelt gratitude to have invited me to this wonderful event. It's always a pleasure to return to your beautiful country, and every time I come, I can make an observation that there's been significant progress, and there has been a distance that the country has traveled, which in relative terms, compared to the other countries that I traveled around in Asia Pacific, is far more grounded in your simplicity and humanity as the core values, as I've essentially always seen Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan people to be associated with. As I was putting together what should really be the keynote, and what are the few messages that I really want to be able to convey, and I started to read around, I couldn't really help myself from the realization that we are indeed living in the golden species of our life. I'm absolutely awestruck with how much and what all have we achieved in a very, very limited time frame as humanity around the world. And a lot of that has essentially been possible because of how we've essentially brought the benefit of technology to improvement of lives and businesses and countries and societies and so on and so forth. Imagine if you and I were sitting about 10 years back and we were having a conversation and he told me that we are going to be having a car that's going to be made on a software platform, could be summoned from your smartphone, which is in your hand, would essentially run from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, would run for about 300 miles without any fueling, would be on electricity, would park on its own, and would charge itself from the hose in the garage. I would actually think that we are crazy. But ladies and gentlemen, that for us is Tesla, and I believe that's in Sri Lanka today. If we were talking about 10 years back and he told me that the life expectancy world over is going to improve by 50% and 25% alone in the Western, the more developed and the mature part of the world, I certainly wouldn't believe you. If you told me that in 2020, 15% of the food that the mega cities in the world are going to consume are going to be coming in from the vertical farms that consume 90% less water and 99% less land, it would be an absolutely unbelievable fact for me. About 10 years back, I was still coming to terms with the definition of exactly what a transgender is, and today in many parts of the world, we are likely to have distinct and separate toilets for them. Now, we can sit all evening and I can entertain you with some of these really, really interesting facts, but I do want everybody in this room to realize that this is by far the golden period of we have essentially seen in humanity and mankind world over. I don't know how many of you know what an exabyte is, other than the fact that it's a very, very large number, which is 10 to the power of 18. The largest library in the world, which is the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., until you talk to our friends in the British Library, and they might tell you that they've got 5 more volumes, but that's not the point that we're going to talk about today. The entire printed content of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. is 1 exabyte into 100,000 times over. Last year alone, this world exchanged information to the order of 1,100 exabytes, which in turn translates to 110 million times the printed content of the largest library of the world. And that's all available on your handphones at a touch of a button or touch of a screen. Back then, when we were essentially talking about the biggest mainframe, the IBM machine that essentially assisted in putting the man on the moon in the Apollo 11 mission, processed the most sophisticated program that all came up to be about 6 megabytes, which is about 10% of the Candy Crush saga sitting on your phones. It's never going to be foolish for me to make a prophecy in the world which is evolving the way we essentially see is as of today, but I'm going to ignore that caution and make a prophecy. And my prophecy in today's time would essentially be that the biggest challenge that we see in the world today is not about terrorism. It's not about climate change. It's not about lack of food, or we're going to be, as a planet, run out of water. I fundamentally believe for business leaders and for political leaders in this room that challenge has to be pronounced and understood as the lack of meaningful job to people. The world that we're creating and how fast it's evolving, we are likely to see things which are going to look more like science fiction and lesser as jobs. Now, we could sit and argue that what's so different about how technology is shaping our future and today than what we've essentially seen over maybe 2 centuries, like 200 years. Just in the last 10 years, if you figure out, or maybe just in the last 3 years, there is technology and there are machines who have the skills where they can understand, they can answer, they can speak, they can hear, and some of them have also started to think on their own, which is quite dramatic and quite rapid from how many of the human beings around the planet are acquiring skills. And that, to me, is what I would essentially call as the era of technological unemployment. And yet, if I was to just kind of take a step back and look at the world, I would only be more excited about the situation that we are essentially in, primarily for 2 reasons. One, technology, the way we've essentially been able to under-leverage it and been able to put forward for our own use is clearly creating a lot of economic abundance. Now, many of us could essentially argue that that's a bit of a shallow materialism, but I think that's exactly what we expect from every economy to essentially be able to create, which is produce a lot more, both in terms of volume as well as in terms of quality, and yet bring the prices down and make it accessible to people who essentially never had access to that kind of goods and services many years in the past. Secondly, it's obviously taking away a lot of the transactional work which are constantly consumed in, which is giving us a lot more of capacity and bandwidth to work and put our skills in areas which are a lot more fulfilling to the human race. As we look at the entire of the digital transformation, it's absolutely creating newer industries, it's converging newer industries. Look at the entire maturity of the technologies and all happening at the same time, right from cloud computing to artificial intelligence to social media to mobile telephony, and to add this up is all which is about the advancements that we currently see with the blockchain. When I sit in this gathering and I talk to the most eminent business and political leaders in Sri Lanka, and we are here to celebrate the best and the most admired of the country, I certainly want to be able to draw the attention that the progress that we're essentially going to be seeing in this part of the world is not necessarily only about corporate profits. It is about the commitment that we finally need to be able to have to the country in terms of its natural resources that we've essentially been very, very fortunate to inherit, and certainly the people of Sri Lanka who need to be able to benefit from the economic prosperity that we essentially created. The downside of technology that sometimes we kind of ignore also is that today 50% of the global wealth is concentrated in the hands of just 9 people. So it's created a polarized society like we've never ever known before. The inequality that we currently see in the world is unprecedented. And if we were to start ignoring that, I would imagine that we are essentially sitting on a bit of a ticking time bomb, and I don't know in which way is it essentially going to blow up everything that we're currently calling as a very transient economic abundance for ourselves. So today, I guess when we celebrate the best and the most admired of Sri Lanka, I would absolutely ask each one of us in this room, because I would imagine nearly all the decisions in this country that will drive it over the next 2 or 3 decades is all available under this roof, is a lot more about how is that it will be hugely meaningful and hugely rewarding to every Sri Lankan as a member of this prosperity, of this progress, and of this economic upliftment that we're essentially talking about. And fundamentally, what they're asking for or what they actually need is not dramatically different. It's not that they're asking for something that we won't be able to deliver as a nation. They're really asking for the skills which are going to be relevant in the future and an opportunity to be able to deploy those skill sets. And in my opinion, they will essentially be able to create everything that we want them to create by themselves. And here, I guess in conclusion, I would absolutely talk about a country where not that the poor are driving cars, but actually the rich are the ones who are using public transport. And in my opinion, that will be a vision where I would essentially see Sri Lanka to be a breakout nation compared to even what many of the Western countries have not been able to deliver or even promise to its citizens. I certainly, in my conclusion, want to make a pledge as Aeon, as a firm, and personally I'm quite committed to this country for my personal affection and obviously for our professional commitment into this island, is fundamentally about we trying to do whatever it possibly takes to make Sri Lanka a better place to work. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me over. And once again, as we look at celebrating the best and the most admired of Sri Lanka, we need to be able to get a lot more focused on how that prosperity becomes a lot more common and a lot more available to literally every member of this country. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for your words, Mr. Chowdhury. Thank you very much indeed. We'd now like to share with you the names of the panel of judges. It was a tough task for all of them to arrive at the winners. Chairman, Mr. Ravi Abeysurya. We also have Mr. Sutish Balasubramaniam, Dr. Harsha Cabral, Mrs. Indira Malvatta, Mr. Riaz Minoor, and Mr. Deepal Suryarachi. I'd like to invite the chairman panel of judges on stage now to speak a few words. Ravi Abeysurya is a dynamic and resourceful professional with utmost integrity, having extensive experience in managing and restructuring private and state-owned enterprises. He functioned as a permanent member of the Financial Sector Reforms Committee, a Prime Ministerial Task Force appointment. He was also named as a Lifetime Achievement Award laureate by the CFA Institute, USA in 2017 for his outstanding work and also the dedication to the investment management profession. He's also functioned as president of many finance and IT BPM associations. Please welcome Chairman, Panel of Judges, Ravi Abisuriya.
Honorable Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. If one asks a question from business gurus, how would you define a most admired company? I'm sure they will respond. A most admired company has several dimensions. I'll mention 3 dimensions. The first dimension is performance excellence, where an organization have a portfolio of businesses and brands that have established a strong presence and influence fairness in the marketplace and a progressive growth trajectory over the years. The second dimension, I'm sure we will hear, is conformance. Companies need to conform to good governance, focus on honesty, integrity, and character, and do the right thing in a sustainable and ethical way. For example, zero tolerance for bribery and corruption. The third dimension is contribution. Being part of a larger society fabric, companies need to contribute to the community and reduce the impact on the environment in which they do business. Now let me briefly explain how the judges singled out 10 incredible companies that set the standard of excellence that other businesses should aspire to achieve. We started the process with a public survey run by Dialogue Mobiles, where stakeholders were asked to nominate companies most worthy of admiration. 180 companies nominated by the stakeholders went through 3 rounds of evaluation. The first round, companies were screened based on 8 financial performance criteria. In the second round, the shortlisted companies were screened by the judges based on a report submitted by the companies that have shown exceptional achievement in 7 qualitative judging criteria selected from the 3 dimensions I mentioned earlier. In the third and final round, the top management of the shortlisted companies made a presentation to the judges on the same 7 qualitative dimensions, where the judges interviewed the management to understand the distinctiveness and essences of each of these companies. I must say the differentials in the scores received by the top 10 companies were wafer thin. After much deliberation, the judges decided not to rank the top 10, as 10 companies emerged from many industry and sectors and size. So let me conclude by giving few tips that can be used for future aspirants of this accolade. First, having multiple initiatives in place to improve employee engagement, attract, develop, and retain the best talent, being an absolute meritocracy, and having a gender balance would help. Second, the amount of taxes paid or mere CSR marketing does not count. Giving back to the community. What the judges were looking for was extraordinary efforts the company has made to solve big social problems, such as spending 10% of after-tax profits on attacking social problems. Thirdly, the participation of the CEO and top management who had a great understanding of the organization in the interview in the third round made a huge difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. May I now invite on stage for a very special function the chairman of ICC Sri Lanka, Mr. Dinesh Virakudi, regional vice president Asia Pacific SIMA, Mr. Venkatramanan, AIA director Chathuri Munavira, and COO ICC Sri Lanka Nihara Nanayakkara. We'd like to have you on stage, please, ladies and gentlemen, the 4 of you. And this is to present a token of appreciation to our distinguished panel of judges. We'd like to have our judges on stage, all of them, Mr. Ravi Abeysurya, Mr. Sutish Balasubramaniam, Dr. Harsha Cabral, Mrs. Indira Malata, Mr. Reyes Milur, and Mr. Deepal Surarachi. A round of applause, and not a very enviable task they had to sit through so many thousands of companies and arrive at the final decision today. So thank you very much, panel of judges, for a job well done. Thank you very much to our presenters as well. Thank you very much indeed. May I now invite on stage to perform another special function, Mr. Austin Fernando, former Secretary to the President of Sri Lanka and Ambassador Designate to India in the company of Shenath D'Souza, Treasurer of the ICCSL, ladies and gentlemen. And this is to present tokens of appreciation to the President of SIMA, Mr. Steven Sventuzelski. If we have you on stage, sir. Thank you very much for your words and your presence here today. The President of SIMA, Mr. Steven Sventuzelski. And we next invite on stage the President of ICC India, Mr. Jawahar Vadivelu. And of course, last but not least, the CEO of India's Aeon Habit Consulting, Mr. Sandeep Chowdhury, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. There is a very important group photograph being taken here, as you can see. And then we thank them, all of them. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed.